Welcome, everybody. I'm Lieutenant Casey Riggs, call sign Juicy Fruit. First and foremost, before we get into the presentation and some questions, first I'd like to thank Vicki for setting this up, helping out with the logistics in the background and making this possible, and also Lieutenant Commander Boer for the invite to talk to you guys and to set this up so we can get you guys a little bit of information and you can ask some questions at the end. We've got about 30 minutes or so at the end where we'll open it up to everybody, and feel free to ask whatever questions you have. Try to keep it on topic to naval aviation in our community, but we're happy to answer any of your questions. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump into the presentation. Like I mentioned, myself and Trent Tom, we're both members of VFC 111, the Sundowners down in Key West. Both of us have kind of a similar background as far as naval aviation and our training, and we're both here at the same squadron together now. So a quick overview of some of the things we'll cover. First, we'll talk about just the process of joining the Navy, different paths towards commissioning, what that looks like. I'm sure a lot of you probably have information on that, but just to do a quick review. Of note, just to get into naval aviation, to be a fighter pilot, or really just in naval aviation in general, are all commissioned officers. So it's kind of the first step in the process is college education, getting a 4-year degree, and then from there commissioning into the Navy. So once we talk about that, and then the specific selection process to get into naval aviation, once you've got a commission, is just what flight school is like. So the initial when you check in down in Pensacola from day one, about how long each different phase takes. And then eventually, once you get through of all the flight school and training, you get your wings of gold, become an actual naval aviator. And then from there, we'll move on to talking a little bit about what your first tour or what the fleet life is like in a squadron flying F-18s or Growlers or F-35s, whatever the case may be. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up a little bit just with some specifics on what we do here at VFC 111, the Sundowners down in Key West. So to kick it off, commissioning sources, as I mentioned, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, but just to kind of quickly review. So one of the options you can go after in order to get a commission is Officers Candidate School. So that works essentially, go to any civilian college in the nation, and once you have your 4-year degree, you can apply to go through a 12-week course that teaches you all the basics, all the rules and regulations, and how the Navy works so that you can commission and enter the service as an officer. So there's no other requirement other than you have a 4-year degree from any college in the country. The next option is through the United States Naval Academy. An excellent opportunity if you have the ability to go there. It is highly competitive, so it's important that you have really good grades, that you show some leadership opportunities, whether you play sports or you just get involved in groups like this, like Sea Cadets, things like that show excellent leadership potential, things like that. So do well in school, do extracurricular activities, things like that, and it's a competitive option, but it's a free education. Next option is through ROTC, or Reserve Officer Training Corps. So ROTC works, there's colleges throughout the country that have a specific ROTC program. And in that program, during your 4 years at college, you take extra courses and you do some summer training as a midshipman, in which kind of during your 4 years while you're getting your degree, you get the training that you would get if you went through OCS, or kind of similar to what you learn at the academy. So similar process there, you get your 4-year degree from any one of those specific colleges. And then the last option is Seaman to Admiral. So this one's kind of more specific. This is for enlisted personnel. So you can go straight into the Navy and enlist. And then again, it's a very competitive program. I've known a few people that have done it, but it is very difficult to get into. But you can go from enlisted to either work on getting your college education while you're active duty, or potentially give you those 4 years to go to college while you're still considered active duty. And then once you finish that, you commission into the Navy as an officer. Those are kind of some of the options to get in. as far as actual commissioning routes. And then from there, once you've got your college education and kind of your commissioning source figured out, the actual selection for naval aviation is a little bit more specific from there. So they take into account your academics while you're going through and getting your degree. So it's important to get good grades and work hard at that. And then they also take into account your major in general. So technical majors in the kind of STEM category are encouraged, but they're definitely not required. So all majors are open, but definitely if you have some sort of science, technology, engineering background, those will help the process. With that, they also take into account a specific round of tests called the ASTB. In those tests, they look at a couple of different areas, whether it's math, some mechanical comprehension, some aviation and nautical terms, things like that. And then you get a score at the end of that test, and that tells you what your kind of overall aptitude would be for the aviation community. And then lastly, once you get through those tests, there's the physical or the medical portion of it, where you get a full flight physical and they take a look at your medical history, and just to make sure that things like your eyesight is good. You can get corrective surgery, things like that. There's kind of specific categories. Personally, I did that. My vision was not good enough as I was going through college, so I went out and I got PRK done, or a lot of you have probably heard about LASIK. So there are options if your eyesight's not perfect now. All's not lost. You can still get that sorted out. But there's other aspects they look at just to make sure that you're in good physical condition. You can't be colorblind, things like that. From there, all that information goes, folks will look at your record, all the things that kind of took into account there, and determine who they're going to select for aviation. So unfortunately, you don't have, depending on your commissioning source, you don't have a whole lot that you can do to specifically say, I want to be aviation. Obviously, show your interest, do well at all those things, and go for it. And the selection process kind of just depends on what is available. From there, once you get into naval aviation and you commission and join the Navy, the flight school process. This chart, it's a little bit of an eye chart, so apologize for that. But it was kind of the best way, I think, to show the different steps along the way and what you could ultimately end up flying. So everyone starts on the left-hand side there at IFS or API. I'll talk to those in a second. And then ultimately at the end, depending on what you're interested in, what you want to fly in the Navy, on the far right-hand side are all the different platforms that the Navy operates and that they fly. Specifically for us in the fighter pilot community, we're kind of in that category, the second from the top there, either it flying F-18s, F-35s, EA-18 growlers. Those are kind of the specifics for us in the fighter community. So for flight school, it starts for everybody down in Pensacola, Florida, what we call kind of the cradle of naval aviation. So whether you're going to be a pilot or whether you're going to be a naval flight officer, which is involved in aviation but not actually at the controls as the pilot, everyone starts in the same place from the same point. So it's about 6 weeks of just academics in API is kind of the first step of it, where you learn some of the basics of aerodynamics, weather, navigation, engines, things like that. So those 6 weeks, you do a course each week, you take a test at the end of it, and you're graded on all of those. When you get to the end of those 6 weeks, you've finished with kind of the first step of the process. When you go down there, you also do some swim, survival, things like that, but it's mostly academic. After that, you go to primary, which is in 2 different places. So you either stay pretty close to Pensacola at a place called Whiting Field, or you move down to Corpus Christi, Texas. But both places fly the same aircraft. So in primary, you're going to fly the T6, which is a smaller 2-seat turboprop aircraft. From there, you spend about 6 to 9 months, just depending on how many people are going through at that time, what the weather's like, things like that. And that's when you kind of get the foundation of what it's like to fly in the Navy. So you learn how to fly on instruments, you learn how to fly aerobatics, so you get to do barrel rolls and loops and things like that. And then you get to do a little bit of formation flying at the end of it to kind of wrap it up. So this is kind of the first breaking point for where, depending on what you want to do in the Navy and what you want to fly, you kind of have the choice to branch off. So everything you've done up to that point, all your tests and all the flights you've done in primary, all that's graded, and they take that into account, and there's a selection process. From there, you put in what your preferences are, and then the Navy looks at how many spots they have at different places, and they assign each person to their career path from there. For us in the fighter community, we go through intermediate and advanced in the T-45, which is kind of the first jet aircraft that you get to learn to fly. From there, you go to either Meridian, Mississippi, or Kingsville, Texas. Those are kind of the two locations that have those training commands. And you go through the process. It takes about a year on average to get through that whole training pipeline. So you start from the beginning, just learning the basics of the aircraft, how to fly it, and then you progress all the way through a strike phase where you learn how to drop bombs, and you also go through some advanced formation flying, and then it culminates at the very end of it in your first trip to an aircraft carrier during the carrier qualification phase, where you actually get to go land on an aircraft carrier. That's probably one of the biggest moments, I'd say. To this day, I'll never forget the first time that I flew behind the aircraft carrier in a T-45, and the very first time that you get launched off the front of it on the catch stroke, or you try to land behind the boat and take your first trap. Those are definitely, if you love adrenaline, if you like exciting things, that is just about as good as it gets flying around an aircraft carrier, at least as far as what I've done so far in my career. So once you finish the carrier qualification phase, that's when you finally finished all of your student training, and that's when you earn your wings of gold and you become a naval aviator. So that whole process from start to finish takes about 2 years. Some people get through a little quicker. If there's not a lot of people going through it, the weather happens to be good. Sometimes it can take a little longer, but the average is about 2 years before you're actually qualified as a naval aviator. With that, kind of the commitment that comes with it, for the Navy investing all those resources and time to train you, is for us, we owe 8 years of service after we get our wings. So a total for this pipeline, if you want to be in the fighter community in the Navy, you're going to spend about 10 years in the Navy from start to finish, kind of for your initial obligation. Once you've finished flight school, you move on to the fleet. And this is where you get your first opportunity to fly a deploying aircraft and be involved in a squadron that's going to go out overseas and deploy. So to do that, you transition to your new platform at what's called the Fleet Replacement Squadron, or an FRS. There's a couple of those. There's one on the East Coast and there's one on the West Coast. And then if you're going to fly Growlers, there's one up in Washington State as well. So you go to one of those two or three squadrons, and that's where you learn the specifics of either the F-18, whether that's a single-seat F-18 Echo or a two-seat F-18 Foxtrot, or there's actually F-35s have started now, so they are selecting people to go through F-35 training to fly that, or as I mentioned, the Growler as well. So you spend about a year going through a similar training process as you did through flight school, just learning the aircraft, learning how to fly it, and what the tactics are, and kind of just the basics. Once you finish that year of training, then you join the fleet. From there, you go to a squadron. Again, it could be East Coast, West Coast, or there are also squadrons out in Japan stationed there as well. And from there, it's kind of your first experience actually deploying with the Navy in an active duty squadron. What's life like during those first 3 years in the fleet? This is when you've spent 3 years or so training, but now you're actually going out to go on a deployment and fly an F-18 or whatever the case may be. So you start off in your squadron, though, you're still a new guy. You're still what we call a nugget, where you know the aircraft, you know how to fly it, but you don't know the tactics and how a squadron works yet. So you kind of start back at square one again as a nugget. But this time, by the time you get to the end of those 3 short years in your fleet tour, you're going to progress from that to leading a combat division lead, where you're going to take 2, 3, or an entire division of 4 aircraft out on a combat mission potentially overseas. So you learn a lot in that amount of time. You get a lot of good experience. You get to see and do a lot of really cool things. in general, kind of what the deployments are like and what that life is. When you join your first squadron, you never know where they're going to be. Sometimes your squadron is already out on a deployment overseas, and you have to fly out to go meet them. Sometimes your squadrons just come back from deployment, and they're going to have a little bit of downtime before they do anything. So it's hard to tell. It just depends on the squadron you go to and what is going on in the world. But the general cycle is about the same. So before you go out on deployment, there's usually about a 6 months of what's called workups, where you spend a lot of time leaving on detachments. You might go out to the boat or to the aircraft carrier for about a month, and you come back home for a few weeks, and then you'll go out on another detachment. So you usually go out about 4 or so different detachments for about a month, just to get training at different stages to prepare the entire squadron and air wing for the deployment. Following that 6-month lead up, then you go out on deployment, and that's going to depend on whether you're on the East Coast or West Coast, what's going on in the world. But there's generally a few different theaters that we deploy to. You'll either be kind of off the coast of Asia, or you might find yourself in the Middle East. But those are kind of general places that you'll find yourself. Again, they last about 6 to 9 months, just depending on what's going on. But that's about the average time that you spend away. From there, you come back and you spend about 2 or so months still, current, still flying, ready to go back out in case something happens. But in general, things kind of calm down and you get a little bit more time to relax. So that's just kind of the general deployment cycle, what it's like. But it does vary depending on what your squadron's doing and what's going on in the world. So it's really hard to tell exactly what that's going to look like. The general lifestyle and what it's like. So it is a lot of hard work. You spend all these years training to do what you're about to go out and do. So you do work really long days, and it's a lot of work, but it's extremely rewarding. And the things that you get to go do are something that you never thought you'd have the opportunity to do. You get to go to port calls and see places that you never thought you'd get to travel. And you also get really, really close with the people that you go and deploy with. So the camaraderie that comes with it is really something that you're not going to find anywhere else. When you live, you eat, you sleep, and you're basically your entire life is on an aircraft carrier with the same group of people, you naturally get pretty close and you develop some pretty tight bonds. They basically become kind of your second family. So you get to know them really well, and it's a very unique thing in what we do. And really just in general, things that you get to do, flying around an aircraft carrier, landing at F-18 on the back of a moving ship in the middle of the night when the sea's moving and the deck's rocking. That's something that just, there's nothing else out there that can really get your blood pumping and adrenaline going like that. So it's a really cool, a very unique experience and something that you don't get to do a lot of other places. Following the fleet experience, or those first 3 years, just some options and career paths that are available to you after that. You're going to rotate to 3 years of shore duty, where you expect to get a little bit more time off just to kind of wind down a little bit and get a little bit different experience, something that you haven't maybe done before. So one of the options you can do is just to go back as an instructor pilot, either flying T-45s or F-18s where you were just trained and this time be an instructor. One of the other options you can go do is Top Gun. So there's a weapons school on the East and West Coast, and you can go there, and that gives you the opportunity to be trained on the latest tactics and what we're doing out there, as well as what our threat's capable of and how we're going to combat that. So an excellent opportunity if you get the chance to go through Top Gun. Pretty cool, unique experience. Another option is test pilot school. So you get to fly a lot of different types of aircraft. You get to test kind of the latest software and weapons that are coming out, as well as platforms. F-35 is fairly new. The guys that went through test pilot school were the first ones that got to fly it and test it out. So some excellent opportunities there. There's also some pilot exchange program opportunities where you get to go overseas with foreign countries, and you get to fly their aircraft, and they send someone back to the United States. So really awesome opportunity if you like to travel, if you want to go see other countries and experience their cultures. The Navy will send you on exchange programs to do that. And then lastly, one of the other opportunities we have is what Ben and I do, and that's to be adversary instructors. So we get the unique opportunity to learn a new aircraft, the F-5, and then to specialize in kind of a unique or a special mission set. So all we do down here is we train the fleet and we train the students that are coming through initially in their platforms. And we train them in air-to-air combat, and we train them in dogfighting, basically. So we get to focus on just that mission set, get really good at it, and we get to teach it to everyone that comes here that we support. And I'll talk a little bit about VFC, our squadron, a little bit at the end, but that's one of the things that you can go do. And then down the road, generally you kind of rotate back and forth between 3 years of sea duty, going out on deployments, and then you spend 3 years back at home on shore duty. There's some other opportunities in there, but just for some other opportunities down the road, if it's something that you'd like to do, you can be the commanding officer of one of the squadrons. You can also be the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier or an entire air wing. Those are kind of down the line in your career, but those are definitely options available. And then also, especially if you go kind of the test pilot route, there's NASA, and there's the astronaut route if you want to pursue that. So really the options kind of once you've gotten through a couple of tours and you find out the things that you want to do, and like the options from there kind of branch off it, and it's kind of whatever you want to pursue from that point. Now transitioning a little bit about what VFC 111 is and what the Sundowners do down here in Key West. So we're a pretty unique squadron. There's only a couple squadrons like it in the Navy. Our lineage dates all the way back to World War II in 1942 when they flew F-6F Hellcats. The squadron's taken a lot of different forms and flown a lot of different aircraft, but most recently in 2006, keeping that lineage, it was stood up as VFC 111. So our new mission this time, flying the F-5, is to support the fleet and students coming through for their training as an adversary. So what that means is we are the bad guys. Basically every day we go fly, we're the bad guys. So we use our platform and our skills and knowledge to basically fight as if we are the adversary, to allow them to train to their tactics. The aircraft that we fly, it's the F-5N Tiger II. Again, it's a pretty unique aircraft. There's only about 40 of them in the Navy, split between a couple of different squadrons that do what we do. It's a single seat jet, so there is no back seat. There are a couple of trainers out there that are pretty unique, but the majority are all just single seat. 2 engines, both capable of afterburner, and we do have supersonic capability, so we can go faster than the speed of sound. And then also just part of what our mission is, it's a highly maneuverable jet. Performance-wise, we may not have an advantage against some of the aircraft that we fly, but because we were able to specialize in our mission set and do it regularly, we get pretty good at it. So it definitely makes up for that. Another kind of unique part about our squadron, so we're not an entirely active duty squadron. It's actually mostly reservists. So CellRes is what you'd think of as sort of a part-time reservist. They come into town for about 1 week a month and fly, and then they head back home to do their normal jobs. There's also FTS, which is full-time reservists. So you can kind of think of them as active duty, but they're actually technically reservists. And then that's what the majority of our enlisted sailors are. And then lastly, there's a small amount of active duty, which is what Ben and I are, that come here from the fleet before we head back out. And it's all just junior officers, so lieutenants for active duty part. And then one of the more unique things about our squadron is our maintenance. So typically in a Navy squadron, it's all active duty maintainers, sailors that do all of the maintenance on the aircraft, whatever that aircraft happens to be. But here we actually have civilian contractors that do all of the maintenance for our jets. So a little bit unique, but it kind of relieves that burden from the active duty component. And then lastly, why are we here down in Key West? I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's a great location. The tourism industry down here is booming because people love to come down here and vacation. It's still in the United States, so you don't have to go overseas, but you get that tropical environment, which is pretty awesome. And with that, we have beautiful weather. So it's pretty much always blue skies with a little bit of thunderstorms that pop up in the summertime, but we really don't run into a lot of canceled events because the weather's bad. It's almost always pretty nice down here. one exception to that, obviously, is hurricane season. You really never know what's going to happen once June to September rolls around, but we kind of just roll on as if there is no hurricane season, and then when they do pop up, we just kind of roll with it. And then lastly, because of the airspace that we have and how close we are to it, we're able to provide some of the most realistic training that you can get. We don't have to worry about airline traffic coming in and out. We have essentially as much airspace as we want to do all the training that we need to do. And then lastly, the resources that we have. Our entire base is dedicated to hangars available for squadrons to come in and use them while they're here training. And we have a squadron that's purely dedicated to just providing the training to whoever comes into town, which is pretty unique. You don't really find that anywhere else. Lastly, just to kind of sum it up, if any of this stuff is interesting to you, if it sounds like something that you might want to do for your career or down the line, or just something you want more information about, definitely reach out. I'll provide my email here at the end of this. We're going to answer some questions, but feel free to ask as much as you want. We're happy to give any information we can. Honestly, most of this I didn't know when I started off. I knew that I wanted to fly since I was a kid. I knew I wanted to join the Navy, but I didn't really know what it meant to go through the Navy and all of the training involved with that. So there's a lot of information that I didn't know, and I kind of just had to learn along the way. And with that, if it's something that you want to do, always continue to make goals for yourself, whether that's just short-term goals for things that you want to do over the next couple months or this year in school. And then also keep in mind things that you want to do down the road. You know, if you want to, what you want to do in college, if that's something that you want to do, and if a career in the Navy is something that you want to do. So, and with that, just work towards those goals and never give up. Don't doubt yourself. You're your biggest worst enemy, and the worst that can ever happen if you try to do something and someone tells you no. But if you never even try, then the opportunity will never have presented itself. So keep your goals, stick with it, and work hard. With that, we have a quick video here I'll show. This is just a little bit of footage from one of the deployments that I went out on. It's about 5 minutes. Bear with me. I know the internet connection is not the best, so if it's a little choppy, apologize for that. Enjoyed a short video. With that, before we turn it over for some questions, I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Wadham here. He's got another short video that he's going to share.
Cool. Once again, I'm Lieutenant Ben Wadham, call sign Trenton. The video I'm going to show you is from our deployment last year. Kind of some backstory on it, though. We were flying in Syria, and there's two types of things that SEALs or any personnel on the ground can call in to help other than actually employing. One's called a show of presence. That's essentially you fly over and you fly over our troops, give them, for lack of a better way of putting it, motivation. Just having planes flying low, fast, with bombs on, saying, hey, guys, if you need anything, we're here to help. And then two, you can do a show of force. That's over enemies that are potentially engaging our troops. You fly over them. You can either shoot around them but not hit them, and it's their kind of last warning of like, hey, if y'all don't stop doing what you're doing, especially with our troops, then we will come back and we will employ. So this first the video I have, it's only 20 seconds long, but it's another JO, my squadron, as well as me, in Syria, flying over some SEALs, giving them a show of presence. They were right on the border, kind of where the Syrians were, as well as potential ISIS fighters. So we were overhead flying for them, and they requested a show of presence. So you'll see that we come by and do a low flyover for them. Cool. Once again, that's just in Syria. The guys, they're there day in, day out, doing the work of the country, and they're right on the front lines within a couple miles of people that want to do bad things to them. So us flying overhead, especially with ordnance and whatnot, gives them kind of a security blanket. Not to mention, hopefully it provides motivation as we fly overhead, knowing that we've got their backs. After that video, one more thing before we get into questions. Something came up, a question came up about, can you get LASIK or not? And still fly in the Navy. It didn't used to be the case when Lieutenant Riggs and I joined. Now you can get LASIK, PRK, another type that I'm not familiar with, but it's called SMILE. I actually reached out to a flight doctor during this presentation. So you can get all those done. It is no longer disqualifying to go into the Navy, assuming you get it done. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, awesome. And just to kind of add to the PRK thing, so I had PRK done before LASIK was approved. So that's the procedure I had done, and it was before I had commissioned, before I got an aviation spot. And because it wasn't LASIK wasn't approved yet, and I actually had to have a waiver in my medical record for that. But in the last few years, really come along with things, and now they've just completely even removed that from my record. So things change with the medical field a lot. So in the next, there's definitely a lot of options out there. Let's see, how many different aircraft have you flown in your training? So started off with initially a little Cessna, so part of the basic intro training that you do. So that was the first one. From there, flew a T6, and then after that, a T45, and then an F-18, and now an F-5 that we fly now. So it's been about 5 different aircraft so far.
Cool. I'm seeing a plethora of questions come in. So Casey, if you're cool with that, I'll answer. There are a couple of them are short. I'll answer 3 in rapid succession.
Yeah, go for it.
First one, how hard to get accepted to the Naval Academy? Neither of us went there. You have to get a nomination from a congressman or a senator or a presidential nomination. You also have to go through, which each one of those has their own qualifications if you're to see if you're available to get one of those. Not only that, you have to go through an interview, and then your grades as well as your extracurriculars in school have to be pretty stellar. So it's not undoable, but you have to start early in high school and just make sure you keep in front of it. Next one is, do you see a lot of combat? So I went on 2 deployments. The first deployment was basically a deterrence mission. We were just in the South China Sea, deterring China, letting them know, hey, we're here. So I didn't see any combat at that time. The last deployment last year, we flew in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. So technically combat time, I only employed 2 bombs, 2 2,000-pounders on some ISIS cave tunnels. Some other guys dropped up to 30 bombs, so it kind of varies depending on your mission, the scheduling for the day, and whatnot. And then lastly, what's it like in the cockpit? Lieutenant Riggs, you can kind of back me up here. It's a lot quieter than you think. You put earplugs in, you put your helmet on, and it's kind of serene, especially when you're walking out to the jet and other jets are starting or jets are flying. It's super loud, but the second you get in the cockpit and shut the canopy, it's quiet. There are some beeps and squeaks that you hear, especially the first time you go solo. You're like, I've never heard that before, and you're wondering, like, is this bad? But no, it's small in the cockpit. I'm 5'11", and I fit decently, but some of the bigger guys, it's a little cramped. Back over to you, Juicy.
Yeah, I'd say in that regard, I'm 6'2", and it's a little bit of a tight fit. I usually keep the rudder pedals all the way out and the seat as far down as I can get. But it works. When you go through the medical process, they take a lot of measurements to determine different cockpits that you'll fit in or some that you won't. So they rule you out of anything that you wouldn't be able to fit in, for sure. Is bad hearing disqualifying? If you ask my wife, she'd say I'm borderline deaf. So I wouldn't say it's totally disqualifying, but they do a lot of hearing tests. They put you in like a soundproof chamber, and they let you listen to some tones. So that's all just part of the medical process to figure out if you'll be suited for it or not. How hard was pilot school in regards to academics? So a big piece of that is just going through your college education. So that kind of gives you the foundation of study skills and how to do well in school. So a lot of that, you kind of already have those skills by the time you get to pilot school. And then from there, a lot of it is just memorization, getting to know kind of the new numbers and concepts. So I wouldn't say it's particularly hard as long as you put in the time and you develop those study skills when you're in college. If you've made it through your college education, it wouldn't be anything, that you haven't seen before. It's just kind of a new challenge.
Couple of questions. Easy one. Lowest elevation that I've ever flown? Well, I've landed, so I'm going to say 0. But when you're doing like a low level, you can fly down to about 200 feet, do demos at 100 or just below 100 feet, going about 480 knots. So it comes fast and furious, but you train for it. Next, the max height you can go. So the highest altitude you go depends on your aircraft platform. I've known some guys that have pushed it to about 50,000 feet, which is pretty high up there. 2 more quick ones. The height restriction. There are height restrictions depending on the aircraft. So fighters tend, if you're a taller person, it's a little bit more restrictive. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the cockpits are pretty small, but you can definitely go fly the big wing aircraft. Another question that I probably get a lot, and hopefully answers a lot of questions, is do you need to be a private pilot in high school, or did it help become one? My answer to that is I did not fly. Prior to high school, I did a little bit with my dad and his airplane, but no private pilot license. So they teach you everything you need to know. The biggest thing I would say is once you get to flight school, a lot of people, they just immediately got out of college. It's the first time you're getting a real steady paycheck and you have all this freedom. So a lot of guys guys and gals just kind of goof off or like they take it seriously, but they're not like putting in all the time and effort needed. So like Lieutenant Rick said, it's imperative that you work hard in flight school. And as long as you do that, you have plenty of time to learn to fly, learn the academics, as well as still have a good time. But it's just a good balance of just the time management, making sure that you get everything done.
Yeah, I'd say with that, kind of a big mentality in our community is work hard, play hard. So as long as you put in the effort and you work hard, we also like to go out and have a good time and enjoy the time we do have. So that's kind of a mentality that we have in the community. So there's a question about air sickness. What happens if you get air sickness while you're in your flight? So a lot of that happens or gets ironed out when you go through your initial flight school. I personally never really had any issues with air sickness, but I know a lot of people that did, just because it's doing something totally new that your body's not used to, especially when you start doing barrel rolls and loops and things like that. It really confuses your body. It doesn't really kind of know what to expect. They have flight docs that are dedicated to getting you through those things. They'll put you in a chair and spin you around so they can kind of train your body to get used to it. There are a few exceptions where people just can't quite get over it, but if you get airsick, it's pretty common, and it happens to a lot of people, and the flight docs help you work through it. So that's really not too much of an issue. Have you ever buzzed a tower, and what does it feel like to be flying? So flying in general is it's really hard to describe because you're soaring through the clouds. There's really nothing holding you back from really going anywhere you want to go as fast as you want to go. There's a lot of freedom in flying that is just something that you can't really get anywhere else, especially in a jet where you get to go fast, you get to go low to the ground, and you get to do some pretty cool missions, including dogfighting. So it's really a surreal experience. It's hard to put into words, but if you've just imagined flying before, where you really have no limits or bounds, it's a lot like that. And then have you ever buzzed a tower? This is definitely one of the favorite things to do around the aircraft carrier. If you find a little bit of extra time in your mission and you request a tower to do a flyby, generally they love it, especially if you can catch it during FOD walkdown when there's an entire crew on the deck of the carrier looking for pieces of foreign object that can get in the aircraft. So if you can catch it during that time when there's a crowd of maybe 50 people up there, and tower lets you do it, then it's a pretty cool experience. You basically go as low and as fast as you can right off the deck of the carrier, and it's a lot of fun to do. So you don't get to do it a whole lot at home, but around the carrier where there's not as many rules, it's definitely something that we get to do a lot.
What I saw a couple times, how is COVID or the coronavirus affecting us? Well, you can clearly see, it's Saturday, but Lieutenant Riggs and I are sitting at home. Our command is we're flying minimally to keep currency, but for the most part, we are kind of self-quarantining or at least self-social distancing ourselves. So the flying is kind of dried up to an extent. One person asked about bombs. Yep, I already said I dropped bombs. I believe Juicy Fruit has also dropped bombs. What's it like going off the catapult? So think of the fastest acceleration you've ever had in a car, or the fastest you've accelerated in a roller coaster, and multiply that by probably tenfold, and that's kind of what it feels like going off the end of the carrier. Daytime, it's really fun. Nighttime, especially when there's no moon, it's unbelievably unsettling. You kind of get used to it, but it's always scary because the second you go off the carrier and there's no lights out there, it's like you're flying in space. You can't tell which way's up, which way's down, so you have to try and trust your instruments, which is one of the more interesting things of flying off of the ship. Max Gs, every aircraft is specified on how many Gs it can pull. Our aircraft is about 7.5 Gs is what you can pull. You can pull more than that, but then the aircraft has to get inspected. There are some Air Force planes that are rated up to 9 Gs, so it kind of depends on the platform that you are flying. Naval Academy versus ROTC, which one is better to get to flight school? I would say, even though I was ROTC, there's probably more prestige coming out of the Naval Academy. But that being said, I did ROTC, I got here. So you can do it either way. It's just depending on kind of how you want your college experience to go. So there's a lot of variations to that. If you guys have any more detailed questions about that, I could write a whole couple paragraphs on that to explain it more. And then lastly, someone asked where you learned to fly the A-10. Unfortunately, you will not be flying the A-10 if you're in the Navy. That's an Air Force plane. So you would have to go to Air Force, commissioned as an officer in the Air Force, and then any of their planes go to their flight training.
Nice. There's a couple questions about, like, I don't have a lot of knowledge about aviation or any of those things. What do you need to know as an aviator? Really, the biggest advice I can tell you is just do well in your academics and do something that you want to do. So technical majors are highly encouraged, but really the important part is that it's something that you're interested in and something that you're going to do well at. You don't really need any specific aviation knowledge to get into the community. Once you kind of get towards the end of your, honestly, I had zero flying experience whatsoever. I'd never been involved in aviation. And up until really my junior or senior year of college, I didn't know anything about flying or aviation in general, just basics on what the airways look like or things like that. So you don't really need that knowledge. What you do need is kind of the drive to succeed and to do well at something that you're interested in. So buckle down on your academics, do some extracurricular activities, show some leadership potential, and then, play sports always help too, because it helps with the physical conditioning and also kind of helps with leadership. So those are kind of some of the things, if you can get involved in, really help out a lot. And just the important thing is that you do well at the things that you do. And that will show that, you're trainable. And once you get into the Navy and into the aviation community, they will teach you everything that you need to know about aviation. So you don't need to worry too much about that. Were they refueling in the first video? Yeah, there was some airborne refueling. That's something that, especially flying around an aircraft carrier, that's unique to naval aviation. Air Force jets refuel as well, but I think we're a little more familiar with it because not only do we refuel from other aircraft, but F-18s are also the tankers in our own air wings. So my particular squadron was a tanking squadron. So we had a couple of our jets that were outfitted with tanks that carry extra fuel and a special, what's called an aerial refueling store, or a special pod that has a basket and a hose on the end of it so that we can transfer gas to other aircraft. That's always one of the biggest concerns when you're flying in naval aviation and around a carrier over the water is you don't have other runways to go land at. You pretty much have to land on the carrier. So you're always making sure that you have plenty of gas to stay airborne. And we do carry the gas in our own jets, and we refuel airborne.
Cool. Some other questions came up. Deployment, who are the enemies on deployment? It's kind of a loaded question. You can break it down to kind of threat nations of interest or ones we're trying to deter, and it's the big ones you see on the news. Obviously, Lieutenant Commander Brewer will have better knowledge based on being in the intel community, but you focus on places like the Middle East, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, the places you see online, as well as deterrence in the South China Sea. Basically, China trying to make claims that they own certain islands, us trying to say that they're international, they don't own them, and various things. One question came up. Someone said that they were 12 years old and they only have 6 hours. What do they recommend? I think we both hit on what you should do in like high school and stuff to make it better. I will say 12 years old, already flying and already doing this, you're well ahead of where I was. I didn't get serious about it until probably midway through high school and then definitely in college. So keep up your motivation, keep it going. It's never too early to start. And the fact you're motivated this early is definitely a telltale sign that you'll probably have a very successful career if you want to keep going into it. How do you handle G's? So I'm sure you've all heard of the Hick maneuver or the anti-G straining maneuver, where you practice tensing up your whole lower body to help prevent the blood from pooling in your feet. So when you pull G's, the blood wants to flow from your feet. That's why people lose consciousness. So you practice the maneuver where you tense up your whole lower body as well as your abdomen, trying to keep the blood up by your head. There's some other physiological factors, but I think that's enough for this conversation. Average age to be a pilot, it can be anything. I was one of the younger ones for a while. I started flight school right after college at about 22, 23 years old. By the time I got to the fleet after 3 years, I was closer to 25, 26. But you have the commanding officers are usually between, or the skippers usually between older 30s, younger 40s. So it kind of varies depending on where you are in your career. Last two I'll cover before I pass it back. Aircraft carrier landings. Was it scary? First time you went out in the T-45, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely scary because you've never done it before, you don't experience it, and not to mention you're flying overhead, waiting for your turn to land, and you're looking down at the ship, and you're like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to land this airplane on it, but you do so much training that you go and do it. Once you get to the F-18, you've at least been there before, but the F-18 is the first time you do night carrier landings, so it's a very interesting daytime. You're trying to get the feel for it. Different airplane, bigger airplane. Nighttime, the first time you go out, personally, it was awesome, but it was also awesomely scary because all you see is lights out there. Of course, the day I went, there was clouds and there was no moon. So you literally just see lights floating in the middle of a black space. But you rely on your training and you go ahead and do it. Lastly, age, I decided that I want to be a pilot. I kind of allude to it. My whole life I kind of wanted to. My dad flew in the Navy and was actually the commanding officer of a squadron. So I grew up with it. I didn't really seriously consider it, though, until, like I said, about middle school.
Look at a couple other questions. Looks like we still got a couple minutes left. Do your ears pop? Definitely. It just depends on the flight and how high you go and all that. But your body gets used to it over time, so you kind of get used to your ears popping. Something that we do not mess around with is anything sinus related. So if you're starting to get a cold or anything like that, usually you go ahead and ground yourself and you don't fly, just because with the pressure changes, that does have a pretty big effect on your sinuses, and you just don't mess around with that. Kind of some other questions I've seen about COVID-19. I don't want to talk to it too much, but I will say that definitely Navy-wide, I think the message has been sent that the safety of the sailors is kind of the primary concern. So those that are deployed overseas and on deployments currently, they have a mission to execute that they've trained for. But obviously the safety of personnel and the safety of the sailors is paramount. So that's always a big key. Down here in Key West, it's affected us in that a lot of the training has stopped just because people aren't traveling. So there is still some flying going on down here for us, but it's limited. We're all just trying to kind of follow the CDC guidelines, making sure we stay safe. So it's affecting all of us, no matter where you are or what you're doing. But there are still people out there overseas on deployments, kind of doing their mission regardless, just doing their best to stay safe.
Sorry, I saw one about about what's the most gratifying thing, and I just want to answer this because I know General Riggs answered it in his presentation, but I'd say I want to give you my take on it. The most gratifying thing I would say about flying is just the sense of accomplishment. I think every guy that comes back, there's times when it's stressful, like I said, carrier quals, going out doing combat and everything. But the feeling after you come back, I'm sure it's the same with every occupation in the military service. But when you come back after doing all the training and doing your mission, you just get an overwhelming sense of pride in yourself, in your community, being naval aviation for me, as well as just the United States in general. On the flip side, someone asked, what's the least gratifying part? I would just say both Casey and I are married with 3 kids, so a lot of time away. That's not specific to our community, but a lot of people, I would say that was the hardest part for me, is while you're out doing the country's work, you're also away from your family, which is just a sacrifice. Once again, it's not exclusive just to our naval aviation community, but I'd say that was probably the hardest thing to get the hardest thing in the job. And then lastly, just touch on to wrap it up for me. Sea cadets, someone asked, do you think it's good to help you for naval life? And I would say 100%. I mean, look at what we're doing today. We're on a video chat with over 300 people talking about potential careers in the military. I never had opportunities like this. I didn't have any military training or I guess organization like this until I got to ROTC in college. So the fact that you guys are doing this early and getting knowledge like this, I think it is phenomenal training, and I think the program and the organization is great, and I'm glad that all of y'all are in it.
Yeah, well said. With that, Eric, we can turn it over to you. I think we finally reached the time limit here, so
okay.
Feel free to reach out. My email, I'll provide that. I'll pass it over to Eric as well as Vicky. I'll give my email address out there. Any other questions that come in, I'm happy to answer those as they kind of come up in the future. But I think that's all the time we have for today. So Eric, over to you.
So first thing, we want to let you guys know that we'll get more of the answers to your questions to you, and we'll post those on the Sea Cadet Virtual Academy for the cadets out there who didn't get your question answered right now. Upcoming for next week, I want to put out a plug. We're going to do a similar presentation open to all Sea Cadets anywhere in the country on the information warfare community. So you're going to learn about intelligence and cryptologic warfare and cyber warfare engineers and all kinds of cool stuff. That's going to be next Saturday. It's going to be a bit of a time difference because we want to make sure that the cadets out there in California and Hawaii get a chance to participate too. Before I hand it over to Vicky to close us out here, I know everybody in the country is kind of on standstill with this this virus, but it's been great to have, number one, have an event that wasn't canceled, and number two, have all of you together as a Sea Cadet family. No matter all that craziness that's going on out there, we're one big team, one big family, and I'm really proud of all of you for sticking with the program, and I'll hand it over to Vicky now.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank both of our pilots, Lieutenant Wadham and Lieutenant Riggs. Thank you so much for taking your Saturday away from your families. I've been reading a lot of the comments, and the cadets just want to express their gratitude as well. Thank you for your time today, but also for your service to our country. And for everyone that took their time to join the call, thank you so much for joining. We will try to get the answers to some more of your questions from the pilots. And stay safe. Make sure that you're engaging with your Sea Cadet community, and we are looking forward to connecting with you next week.